Well, we can just kick off with this. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Drew. I'm going to kind of be herding us along today. And this is Chris, who's going to be handling our AV and making sure that Zoom works correctly. Our Zoom aficionado here, because he does that, for half of his living. So, um, but yeah, I think we've got about 20 people. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing is, yeah, I'm Drew. I'm on the executive board for IGDA. Chris is our president, um, and we host lots of events for the LA community or chair, I guess it's called. Yeah, so we're the IGDA for Los Angeles. We put on a lot of events for the Los Angeles game development community, and in the wake of COVID-19, we put on events for the entire game development community. So this is a great opportunity for us to do this. We've been putting on online events actually through most of the year. So we've been able to transition pretty nicely with everything that's going on and all the chaos. I'm really excited to get everybody together today for this event. I've been looking for ways to get the sort of back-end engineering infrastructure, everybody in online games, and the technology behind it together for a while. I feel like we haven't quite had a home until very, very recently. GDC didn't have a particular spot for all of these talks and for all these people to meet up. Thanks to Mark and Edward Pereira this year for setting up the Online Game Technology Summit, which I think was really the first time we were able to kind of have a home for these things. I really hope that we can grow this over time and keep this crew together and keep people talking. I think there's a lot of benefit that we can get from having all of these different companies, all of these different developers talking to each other and growing the discipline as a whole. A little bit of background on me. I worked at Riot Games for about 6 years. I worked on their matchmaker. I worked on League of Legends and beyond in their player behavior team, which handled hate speech and sportsmanship within the community. Had a great time there. And more recently, I started a company helping other people to scale their games, doing work for hire and consulting as game breaking studios. Chris, did you want to give a 5-second intro for yourself?
Sure. I'm Chris DeLeon. I run HomeTeamGameDev.com. People around the world build games together for practice, freeware, long-term projects. A lot of people whose life doesn't fit jams anymore. We've released 90 some odd games that way in the past 4 or 5 years. We have a podcast from our guest speakers and stuff that comes out from that. Actually, Mark's been on that, as well as maybe somebody else has been here. And yeah, that's kind of the short version. Outside of that, IGDA also up with Indicate. I'm our alumni lead for that.
Cool. Yeah, and so first I'm going to go through some administrative stuff. I want to show you guys about some upcoming events. The big one that's coming up on the horizon for us is we're doing a panel called "So You've Started a Business, What Now?" And it's going to cover business development, law, and leading companies in the game industry. Patrick Sweeney from Interactive Entertainment Law Group is going to be there talking, and we've got a panel of great people also coming to talk about some of the other pieces of this. So that'll be on July 15th. That's a Wednesday night at 7:30. Hopefully you can join us for that, and we'll be sending out more information about it as we go forward. If you need to catch us on social media, here are the links. We'll have these at the end too if you want to grab them, but you can hear about upcoming events and other things going on in the game industry here. And today's agenda is going to be pretty straightforward. Opening remarks is me talking right now. The next person who will talk will be Mark, and he's going to talk about open source and games. After he's done talking, we'll have a breakout session where everyone can meet each other. We'll break you out into groups of 4 to 6, and you can chat for maybe 15 minutes. During that time, if you have questions or any sort of Q&A for Mark, you can leave that breakout room. We'll explain that, and you can come back and talk to him and ask him any questions you have. Same will take place after we do Chris Cobb's talk, who's going to talk about crossplay and identity. We'll do some breakout rooms after that, and then I'll close this up. And if anyone wants to hang out and chat for another 15 or 20 minutes, get to know everyone, that's fine. We'll be kicking everyone out at 2:30. Cool. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Mark, who's going to be talking about how infrastructure should be the bastion of open source in games. He comes to us from Google, where he's a developer advocate for Google Cloud for Games specifically. And he's known for his involvement with the Gonez project, which put dedicated game servers onto Kubernetes to help companies scale their games. So take it away.
All right. Well, thanks very much for joining me today. This is always really fun talking to a computer screen where I can't see anybody. So today I want to talk about some general feelings and opinions that I have about how I feel like backend game development should be essentially the people behind it should be the bastion of open source in game development. And for a variety of reasons that we will go through today. Thank you very much to Andrew as well for the lovely introduction. A little bit about myself and why you might want to listen to me a little bit in some ways. Like Andrew said, my name is Mark Mandel. I've been a developer advocate at Google Cloud for Games for five years now, something like that. Not that time necessarily matters. I've been a long time open source founder and contributor. Before doing some work in the games industry, I did a lot of stuff in the web, particularly in the Adobe tech space, releasing and founding several pretty well received and widely used open source projects. So I've got a long history with open source. And as Andrew mentioned, founded Aganes.dev, or the Aganes project for running game servers on top of Kubernetes. And that's been doing really well as well. We've got over 80 contributors, 3,000 stars, used by Ubisoft, Mbuck Studios, production games, Super Solid, Jam City, and some other ones that I can't mention, unfortunately, which sucks. But that's been going really well and spending a lot of time with that as well over the last few years as well. Also, I lead developer relations for Google Cloud for Games. That is probably a bit more of an interesting one, just because that means I have a job in which I interact a lot with a lot of game studios across a wide number of companies. And so many people would probably recognize my work in terms of like, oh, Mark goes to conferences and speaks to people, and that's cool. But I do actually do a lot of direct customer engagement with game studios and really, I think, get the opportunity to see a fairly wide purview of like what is going on across infrastructure for games. As Andrew was alluding, and something that I've talked about before, if you've ever met me at GDC, is like I strongly believe that we work in this part of the industry need to talk to each other more, and we really kind of don't. And while it's great to see this change, and you know, as Andrew also says, like I'm a GDC advisor for Online Game Tech Summit with Ed Pereira, which I really wish would have happened this year. Fortunately, circumstances weren't applied. But I had a peer a little while ago who said to me, and he works for another big game studio, and he was like, he actually was saying like, I think you probably have like maybe one of the best views of the trends and the patterns that are happening across all these different game studios because you go visit all these different places and you have an impetus to go do so. Whether I have the best or anything like that, I don't really care, but I think I have a pretty good idea of what's happening across the board. And so hence I have some thoughts and opinions on some of the issues and probably some ways we could potentially solve them. So let's get stuck into that. So probably preaching to the choir here, something you're all very aware of, right? Like multiplayer games are doing like really well at the moment, or if you want to call them online games or games as a service, right? We look at the top 15 games there. A lot of those are freemium games that have a long history of like esports and competitive play. And so the requirement for having backends for games is huge, and I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. And I don't think anyone's going to kind of disagree with me on that point there. But my contention here is kind of that education for online game tech and being able to produce production grade backends from games, from like online systems, backend services, multiplayer backends, is really just like not very good. Especially compared to other areas of game development, especially compared to like, say, the wider tech industry, right? If I want to learn as a person who wants to build a web app or a mobile app, how to build a production grade backend for any of those systems, I can go to a university class. There are a million books. There's online courses, right? I have so many options available to me. And by the same token, in the games industry, if I want to learn how to be an artist or a level designer, or a game designer, right? I can go to courses. There's a plethora of information out there for how to do that, pretty much at a production level. If I want to learn how to do this at a production scale for games, as far as I can see, and I'm happy to be wrong about my opinion on this, there are kind of two paths. It's join an established operations team in a game studio that builds online games, and learn how they do it, right? Partake in that tribal knowledge that exists there because that's where it is. Or create a studio that does online multiplayer games, or create an online multiplayer game or some kind of connected game, and literally go through the trial by fire, which is oh my God, it's successful now. What do we do when things are breaking? And we didn't realize that this was going to be bad, but like we now have to work it out. And to be blunt, I don't think either of these are ideal. We've all probably met the person who's basically just been like, this is the way you do multiplayer games backends, or this is how you do backends for multiplayer games, and this is like the one true way. And in this environment, I actually understand why people come to those conclusions and get very, very, I don't know, defensive of that position, or just like very stuck on it, because you're probably like under crunch, don't have enough time. There isn't a lot of communication, so you're not open to what other people's experimentation are, and you don't have a lot of room for experimentation. And so you're like, this is the one true way, and I'm going to stick with it because it works. And I totally get that. But this is a huge amount of tribal knowledge. This really stagnates like new development practices. It doesn't set up a whole new generation of people coming through who we're going to need if we continue to grow these kinds of games. And I just like, one of the things I see over and over again, and it just, really like hurts my heart, which is like watching engineers reinvent the wheel kind of all over again at the same company, like just all at the same time. Like how many times can you rewrite a leaderboard and have that be happening in the same company at the same time? How many times can people just be like, well, we need to send a message to players based on their demographic information and what their account usage is and their levels and stuff? All these kind of very basic services that we all kind of need, but we're spending time doing the same thing as other people. And to me, it just seems like a waste. It seems like time that could be spent building more amazing things, or the next generation of games, or coming up with innovative technological solutions to these problems that we all have, rather than doing these foundational type stuff. So we come back to my original sort of title of this talk is like, why could this potentially be solved by free and open source software, and why should infrastructure be sort of leading the forefront, I think, in open source for game development, open source game development as a whole. So some statements and some definitions that you're probably very familiar with, right? Free and open source software is software that is both free, so you don't pay for it, and open source. So it has some kind of license with it that allows you to do pretty much what you want with it. So something like Apache or MIT. And the license discussions around open source is a whole other discussion. But basically, I have software that is free and open source. And again, as probably many of you know, like the wider tech sphere, like open source is one. Like this is a standard. If you remember back when we could all gather in the same place at the same time, this is a picture of KubeCon last year, or Cloud Natives Conference. This is 8,000 people who gathered in Seattle for a conference that covers like 12 open source projects. And I know that as infrastructure engineers, many of you were here. I met many of you here, so I know you're aware of this, and I know you see this this aspect of open source being used, because we don't working in infrastructure and working for backend systems. There's no way of getting away from it. I mean, we've all used at least one or more of these, right? I think databases is a great example. People need to store data. There are so many options now available for just storing data, right? Who isn't running at least a Redis instance somewhere? So we are familiar as infrastructure engineers with the open source space. I would expect that many people here have submitted pull requests, or potentially written issues on GitHub, or maybe have started their own open source project, which would be awesome. I'm pushing that out. But so we know this space because we don't have a choice. We work in infrastructure. We work in this space. So we also understand the foundational aspect of open source, I think, to a greater degree of that. But at the same time, we're not necessarily pushing that out there. And I'd like to argue that I think we should be doing more of that. And one of the major reasons that I think we should be doing more of that, not just because we understand the space, but also because open source is more than just code. Yes, it is important and so useful to build these foundations, or build the giants that people can stand on in a technological way, and being able to be hey, here's a tool that we can all use, and rising tide lifts all boats. But it is more than code. When I work on open source projects, and one of the things I love about open source projects is really about the community and the knowledge gathering that gets in one space. So as soon as you build an open source project and you start to build some momentum around it, it really becomes a center point of understanding of best practices. What does it make to build a production system, working on this thing, the documentation, the community that builds around it, and the people that have that knowledge and willing to share it about that. And so it is much more than code. So not only as like the people here who have to, build production systems and use it as a tool for that, they're also able to use it as a vehicle of sharing knowledge about like, what are the trade-offs between different design patterns or different approaches for solving these problems, probably with people that they wouldn't necessarily get to interact with, from outside of their company, or different types of game types. And then it also becomes a tool that people who are going to be the next generation of developers who are working in the infrastructure space can use as an education tool. They can come look at the code and see what it's built at. They can go look at design documents, see how decisions got made. They can interact with the community and ask questions. And it just becomes a centralizing focal point for all of these things. I think that open source, while not necessarily is going to be like the answer for solving one of these problems or some of these challenges we have in this space, I think it is a solution, and I think one that we should consider quite strongly. I'm passionate about this thing. And open source, right? There is a huge number of open source wins here as well. This is not just the only one, either from a contributor or a company or a founding perspective. Being able to access a wider developer pool than you would be able to otherwise, whether you're interacting with it from as a contributor or as a potential founder of a project or a company that's making one out. Being able to set the standard for what it is that you want to do, right? Everyone's building their own proprietary solutions. Awesome. Let's build a standard. Or maybe, they'll end up probably being several standards, which I think is okay too. But that helps with hiring. That helps with onboarding. You can be seen as the company that set that standard going forward, or the person that has done that. And that's great for credibility. And that leads into, as we were talking about, rising visibility. Maybe if you're a company that's looking to hire and you want to be seen more in the technological space, or want to be seen that you're solving some interesting technological problems, this can be a great avenue as well. Even just like the opportunity to build stuff the ideal way, quote unquote, or like not having to cut corners can be a great motivator, and more, right? Like there's lots of stuff around open source and why I think it's super useful, but may not necessarily relate today, but may resonate with you. And there's plenty of prior art out there for you to check out. So cool. You listen to me and suddenly you're completely convinced. Maybe less or more, which is also totally fine. You're like, okay, everything sounds awesome. This sounds great. I'm now completely on board, at least personally. But like, where do I go from here? Can I have some like concrete steps for what it is I can do next? And I'm probably going to talk more from like a company perspective or like a studio perspective, just because those are some of the bigger challenges I see. But hopefully, some of these will still be useful to you, even at the individual contributor level, that kind of stuff as well. So, first step, I say to anyone, especially if they're like want to be a champion for open source inside the studio or company that they work at, is decide why you are creating or contributing to open source. One thing I see a lot of the time, people get really like excited about open source because it's cool and like all these people to get together and like you submit a pull request and it gets accepted and it's a huge dopamine hit and like all that kind of good stuff. But unfortunately, it's fun and cool doesn't necessarily convince your boss. So think about like what are the big wins for open source, how they align with what your company's doing or some of the goals your company has. Maybe you're sitting around and you're saying, wow, it's really hard to hire backend engineers for infrastructure that want to work on games. That's like the biggest problem we have. So maybe if we start doing some open source stuff in the wild and we start getting some contributors, maybe that's some people we could then hire. Or that's something we could potentially, seed out to educational institutions and say, hey, if you taught your students this, then suddenly they could have jobs, where we work, right? Work out what your reasoning is for what it is that you want to do. And then the second part, and this is particularly relevant for if you're running a studio, seriously consider setting up an open source programs office. So this is work, right? None of the stuff around open source definitely comes for free. But this is the second part behind this is what we want to do. So, and why we want to do open source. So the job of an open source programs office is basically to track the work that you're doing in open source and make sure it aligns with the goals that you've set up initially. And this is where like talking to stakeholders, like this part is actually really important because then you can actually show up and say, okay, This is the reason why we want to release this project, be able to contribute, right? Whatever it is that you want to be able to do, and say, okay, these are our goals. And then also what we're going to do is we're going to have this group that not only tracks stuff, but probably also put some processes in place so that we can see whether or not we're actually successful. So, there's some accountability there. The other part of this is really like also setting those processes in place. Usually businesses want to have some safeguards, especially if people aren't used to open source. They'll be like, oh, you just want to give away all that stuff for free, which is not really what you want to do. You want to sort of build foundational tools or stuff like that is usually where that wants to go, that sort of grow the ecosystem and the community. And so that's where like you can put programs in place. This is how you open source a project. This is the review process you need to go through for either a pull request or releasing a new thing. This is like maybe the legal steps that need to be approved as it goes through, right? All that kind of stuff can put that in place so that you actually have a process and can streamline it, log it, track it, see whether or not you're going to work towards your goals. It doesn't have to be necessarily a huge thing from the outset. It can be something you grow over time, but I think it's actually super important. There's a link there to dogroup.org. Well worth checking out. They have a huge number of resources around building an open source programs office, how you do it, why you do it, tools you can use. It's actually a really cool, interesting piece of research in and of itself. But if you need that sort of stuff, I highly recommend that resource. It's really great. I'll mention one other thing as well on the resources side, lawyer training. One of the biggest obstacles I see people having inside their studio, or whether it's a larger production company, is lawyers love to say no to things. I don't know if people have noticed that, because there's less risk if you just say no. If you don't put stuff out there, then we don't have to worry about it. It's worth noting that the Linux Foundation does provide training, not just for lawyers, but all kinds of stuff. But they can provide training. I'm fairly sure I need to go double check. There is a free, just open source licensing course that you can do online. But they will do paid lawyer training for like one-on-ones or as a company for a variety of things. So if you need that kind of training and you want to be able to educate your lawyers, I'm fairly sure they used to do a conference as well, but I couldn't find reference to that. Specifically about this kind of stuff and sort of remove some of that fear, uncertainty, and doubt that lawyers might necessarily have around IP and licensing and that kind of stuff. And there's ways and means of sort of dealing with that. And how they can deal with that, especially also when maybe like if you have to contribute to say another project that may have a contributor license agreement, that kind of stuff, how to deal with that and how to understand how that ecosystem works. That's another good one as well. On the cultural side as well, I would say like if you're like, cool, we've set up an open source project and we want to like help build it, or in both, I think internally and externally, this is something I've noticed as well. You want to foster openness. Definitely a pattern that I've seen. Games industry will get on stage and talk about concepts and stuff, but when it gets down to like technical details and like releasing code, we're not really open about that, and it's a habit that we have. I run an open source project. I will find that the bigger the studio, the more likely they are to DM me directly than to hang out in the public channel. And I work quite regularly to be like, yeah, look, nothing proprietary about what we're talking about here. We might want to bring this back to the users channel, right? For example, or like that's the main public channel. And I'm like, the reasons for which is like, A, it scales better. I can't like respond to just about everybody, but also it means that you can get a faster answer if somebody from the community has also had the same problem as you had. And that's, you know what, honestly, that is an ongoing thing, and just constantly sort of nudging people to be like, hey, this sounds great. Put that issue on GitHub. Hey, public, put that on the Google group, put that back in the main channel. It just requires work to change some patterns and behaviors in that way, just on a regular basis. It's just something you'll have to do. All right. So to wrap things up, and I'll give you some more resources as well. So I strongly believe that having open source to build a foundation for the next generation of games is hugely useful just from an implementation point of view. Even the example that I work on, so I work on a Gonez. We couldn't have built what we built in the time that we built it and built the sophistication of tools that we have without the foundation of Kubernetes behind us. And now we're starting to see people building projects on top of a Gonez and releasing those. So yes, turtles all the way down. But that foundation of the next generation of games, I think, is just going to be so useful so that we all don't have to reinvent the wheel. On top of that, using open source as a tool to educate the next generation of backend game developers, like I just see that as such a hugely valuable tool because it just becomes this artifact, this repository of information and knowledge that people can then look at and share and use for their own education. So if you want to do this, build artifacts and programs to support your goals, work out what your goals are, and then make sure that you can stick to them and have accountability, and you can educate those within your company about how to do that. And then from there, honestly, I would like to see us teach the rest of the gaming world about open source and see the benefits. We see some great work happening there, but I think there could be more. And I really think we could show them, right, like how open source can be both a technological and an educational cornerstone of the market. So I'll give you a bunch of resources as well. Happy to paste these somewhere, Chris or Andrew, if you want me to put them somewhere later on. Contributor covenant, have a code of conduct, please enforce it as well on your open source projects. It's hugely useful. Contributor covenant is a great out of the box one and has been used by a large number of very large projects. It's great. Opensource.org, opensource.guide, opensource.dev, opensource.google.com are guides from a variety of people, including the OCI, Google ourselves, like how do we do open source? I can never remember whether .dev or .guide is the GitHub one. They talk about how to do, even just down to like how to do pull requests or how to manage being a maintainer, all those kind of logistical stuff, all that kind of like cost of like running open source and how to handle that. Great resources, all of them. Check them all out. If you have a question about open source, you can probably find the answer there, I would say. If not, there's wonderful communities out there as well. If you're looking for projects where you want to like be like, how are they doing this, or looking for prior art, I will plug the two projects that I know the best. I work on Agones mostly, so agones.dev. You can check that out. I think we have a really healthy community, and we've been really successful in how we build stuff. There's another one that comes out of my company at Google with Google Cloud, which is OpenMatch, which is a matchmaking framework. It's been doing pretty well as well. Been happy about that. I work with that a little bit, not a huge amount. You can usually find me in there as well. But outside of Google, a couple of ones that I super like. Improbable, if anyone's heard of like Spatial OS, their engineering team has done some amazing open source work. You can check out all the stuff they have in that engineering repo. Particularly if anyone's heard of the Thanos project, which is oh my god, I hope I get this right. Highly distributed setup for Prometheus. That space I don't know that well, but that's been adopted by some massively large companies, and a lot of them. It's really cool to see that work coming out of the game company. If anyone's following along with the work of Embark Studios out of Sweden, they're doing some really cool open source work just in general in game development, especially in Rust. I've been keeping track of them as well. Hugely love their work as well, so you can check that out. Is there any overlap between your open source work and Google's Firebase product? There is not at this stage. That is a good question, though. Not to say that there couldn't be. There just isn't at this point. Some of Google Firebase's stuff, I'm just looking at questions in chat, is open source, like their SDKs and stuff, and they have a bunch of open source samples, though, including, I think, a leaderboard that one of my coworkers made. I'll say finally, if you have extra questions that you want to ask me, please feel free to grab my details. I put out videos as well about backend game dev, as well as I stream somewhat regularly, Agones development as well, and throw those up on YouTube. You can see my presentation recordings up there, as well as the series I started recently called Online Game Tech Drawn Badly, where I explain online game tech with really bad drawings. And I'll also mention, I think there's some really cool stuff happening in the games industry around Black Lives Matter. So I put some links there too, particularly the Justice, Peace, for Freedom, fundraiser, as well as the itch.io bundle for racial justice and equality. If you are interested in participating in any of those, they're great opportunities as well. Cool. Yes, itch.io bundle is running slow. I also didn't realize it's up to something like 1,500 games, which is a huge number of games, but they've raised, $5 million, $6 million, which is just seriously impressive. So thank you very much to them for all doing that kind of work. What's that? Chris says, including like 24 Indicate alumni and Pico 8, a ton of assets for people. Yeah, I grabbed it recently and realized that there are a bunch of assets in there, and I'm going to use them in my presentations from here going out. And I didn't realize I wasn't doing that before. All right, cool. That's my presentation. I will turn the floor to Chris or Andrew, whoever needs it at this point. Do you want me to stop sharing? But finally, yeah, thank you very much for listening and spending your time with me as well. I really appreciate it. I hope you are inspired to do open source with game development, and particularly on the infrastructure side, and help improve the industry for everybody.
Thanks so much, Mark. That's awesome. Yeah, I love some of the things you're saying around education and like what is the pipeline for getting people to do this work. Um, I have I had an interesting stat. I did some pseudoscience last year, and I just the top 10 or dozen biggest companies I could think of in games. I went and on a single day in October, I went and grabbed all of their open engineering hires off their website.
Yep.
And I went and categorized them sort of loosely. And uh, infrastructure and like online or services engineering was 30% of all open recs in these game studios, and we're like Blizzard, Riot, Microsoft Game Studio, Take-Two, like just the biggest ones I could think of.
Yeah.
Rivaled only by game engineering and game tools, which was only 35%.
Yep.
So I mean, we're talking about the second largest subdiscipline in engineering. And I'm not aware of any classes, let alone any programs, that are dedicated to this space for students. So I would love to see something like that.
Yeah, and like to that, there's so much. I mean, I also think of like, and I forgot to mention it, but like, you look at the abundance of information about like, hey, I want to build a scalable web backend. And like how much stuff, like even in our own docs, right? Like on Google Cloud, I'm not even going to deny it. Like this thing, and like watching all of us just be like, so how do I make this web stuff work for game stuff? And we're all solving the same problem. And those kind of, it just feels wasteful, and that kind of irritates me a lot. And so I'd like to see that not be a thing.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. So the next piece, I'll just share my screen for just a quick moment. The next piece is going to be those breakout rooms. So in a moment, Chris will break you out. Groups will be like somewhere between 4 and 6 people each, and we'll give you about 15 minutes or so to chat. Please introduce yourself, meet each other, talk about whatever's on your mind, whatever's important to you. If the room starts to get quiet, I have a little optional topic for you. How does your company handle open source? Just the thing that we were just talking about, or if that's something you really want to chat about. So we can go ahead and do that. But one last thing, if you want to come back and ask questions to Mark, you can leave the breakout room at any time. And Mark, if you could do that as soon as we break you out and leave you in here, they can come back and ask you questions about the topics you were talking about.
Yeah.
Makes sense to everybody?
I think they captured it. And so as a couple notes, I just sent everyone an unmute yourselves request. Obviously, you've got prompts. You're welcome to also like decline that if you want to live in chat, even just go to breakout rooms. But now you can technically unmute if you'd like. The other bit, Drew, if you want to stop share. So a couple quick notes. If you mouse over your camera, and I'll encourage this because basically breakout rooms are also intended as just straight up networking. If you mouse over your camera, the top right, there's triple dots. If you go to rename yourself, watch what I'm doing. At Chris Delion, parentheses, at Home Team Game Dev. And then while I'm on it, he/him. If you rename yourself to have your Twitter handle, and or if you want to throw your pronouns after it, and your company, Twitter handle, etc., it's just an easier way in those breakout rooms to easily follow each other, recognize who you're meeting online, follow up with them after the fact, and so on. The main room where we'll be having Mark still kind of continuing this exact topic Q&A versus the side rooms can frankly be whatever the people really want to chat about.
We weren't done talking.
Sorry. Well, so part of the fun is you'll get in a different scramble later, and then we'll have even more scrambles during the breakout room time at the end. Let me close my little breakout pop-up. Meanwhile, Mark also has prepared some reading list recommendations of additional sources he's going to copy-paste over into our Zoom chats. So I encourage you. The other thing is that the Zoom chat will, in addition to being part of this video, otherwise turn into a pumpkin when this is over. So if you want those links, I encourage you to copy-paste those locally to a text file, to some other format that will survive after this all gets shut down. Any other notes, Mark, came to mind before we kind of hand back over to Drew for carrying into next speaker?
I'm looking for a book that I also really liked, but I can't find it.
All right, and as a reminder to folks, just as a comeback in case anybody missed the thing earlier, you can click the triple dots of your camera to rename yourself. I recommend Twitter handles. Recommend adding welcome to add company one as well, just like I have. Mine's long enough that I think it hit it, but I've also got my pronouns there. I encourage that, just so it's good, so people don't feel a need to guess some things.
Found it.
Sweet. Sorry. Excellent. Other than that, Drew, if you want to take things over, I will reinforce meet everybody.
Cool. So our next speaker is Chris Cobb. He's formerly a platform or server engineer at PopCap and at Riot Games, among others. Currently, he's the co-founder and CTO at Pragma, and Pragma is building the game engine for backend. So he can probably tell you more about that than I can. But Take it away, Chris.
Super briefly, kind of my background, history, and then given the length of this talk, I'm really just going to broach a topic that I think is really fascinating, interesting in this space, and just kind of walk through the intricacies a little bit and just open it up as a topic. Not going to get too deep into the solution space just because that's going to take too long. I also broke every rule of slide construction in that I just have giant bullet lists of dense text, so I won't be reading that out loud. Don't worry, but I'll just use that as kind of a reference point. So I've been in games for just over a decade now. Got my start in large back-end services to power advertising technology at Microsoft. So that's kind of where I learned the ropes of distributed systems. Went into game dev and worked with a few mentors of mine there at PopCap Games, PopCap EA, and spent time doing back-ends to support mobile social games in that kind of like early iOS era. From there, I went to Riot Games. Drew and I worked really closely together on a team called Player Behavior, and I see a bunch of other familiar faces from that group, which is great to see everyone. So we did a lot of work on core game loop matchmaking, behavior systems, reinforcing positive behavior and encouraging sportsmanship, which is something that's really deeply, that's the second layer to all of this is like, hey, we have to build backend services that scale and let players join. I think the whole second wave and second layer of that is stuff that a few studios have taken on in this behavior space that I'm just personally really passionate about, which is how do we connect people online and support building communities in a way that's productive and encouraging, and how do we put tools in place to allow people to build their own communities rather than being like a policing body that's trying to enforce your own kind of rules. So that's an aside, but it's just an area that I really care about. I left in 2018 to make a educational games company called Bot School. We did a little prototype supporting Code.org's efforts, which was really fun and exciting. But from there, we really, we weren't able to take that as far as we wanted. Started doing some consulting. So more recently, I worked with Phoenix Labs on doing their crossplay backend release in partnership with Epic, and then spent a few months working with Epic on their online services. And out of that all came Pragma, which is basically, an effort to create a backend platform as a product and really, build that floor of kind of tools and technology. So, Mark, appreciate the open source talk. It's been an very active discussion as we talk about how are we going to build this business. So maybe something to talk about deeper later, because I'm very interested in the mechanics of that from a business. So with all that said, federated identity. So yeah, let me try to present and you guys tell me if that makes it disappear or not.
Looks great.
Hey, technology. So one piece of the equation on backend services that's foundational to all of it is your account, and it's this account representation. And in a world in which we have social media platforms, we have game platforms, we have publishing platforms, it no longer is the case that as a game developer, that it's valuable to necessarily build your own. In particular, it's ideal if people can connect to the friends and the communities they've already built. And so that federated identity is just this concept that allows you to kind of plug into the matrix of other account systems. It's a concept that goes way, way back. But I'd say in recent times with OpenConnect and OAuth, it's become a lot more viable or feasible. But with it comes a lot of complexity because you are trying to plug in totally discrete companies and technology platforms and social frameworks, which makes it really involved. And, I don't think we're at a place of maturity yet that just works. And all of this, of course, is to power the experience that players want to play anything anywhere. And this idea that, it doesn't matter what game platform I'm on, it doesn't matter whether I'm on mobile, I just want to connect and play with my friends. I want to carry my progress with me. So I'm going to do a 2-minute industry trend overview. I won't go deep on this, but I just want to call out a few things we're probably all familiar with, just in terms of where we're going. And then from there, just talk about some of the nuances of what it takes to really build a cross-platform, cross-play, cross-progression online experience. Let's see. So in terms of industry trends, I think Fortnite was one of the first giant examples of people playing a AAA high-fidelity experience on their phone. And I think a lot of us observed that what it really came down to was the community. It was players want to be where their friends are. And so we've already covered the fact that we've got more of everything, more online, more multiplayer. So in terms of mobile, I think the big question that I think remains open is, what is mobile's purpose? Is it really about achieving high fidelity AAA experiences there, or is it about the community side of this, about connecting with friends? So, it's mostly an open question, but I think it warrants investigation because, for example, a Hearthstone experience really translates well to mobile, and you can also play on a desktop. So that's an experience you can imagine just having full, cross compatibility. Whereas I think an experience like a tactical shooter is something that's just harder inherently, and so it's an open question whether or not we continue pursuing that path. And one question is, do we, the closer you get to peripherals being well supported, for example, like connecting a PlayStation 4 to your phone is now something that you can just do, a PS4 controller, which is excellent. And the thing that I'm really excited about on this social and community side is, what about the real, like, I want a deep companion app. I want to be like farming progression systems in a separate, strong experience that then feeds right back into the AAA game that I might be playing on my console or PC. Game platforms, they all exist. I think, I'm going to just breeze through this, but importantly, I think that as we become increasingly cross-platform, cross-play, which platform you're playing on becomes less and less important. And the platform holders have a stake in you locking into their ecosystem, obviously. But I think that what we're seeing is, the desire for people to be connected anywhere is really driving players and studios towards caring less about the platform and caring more about the community. Streaming obviously is a fascinating topic. I'm not going to go deep into it. There's just really a question of that takes you to another level of, hey, I don't even need a high-powered PC because if these streaming experiences work. And there's a second layer there of, will this be for every game always, or will this be for a certain kind of subset? And I just think it's an interesting space to kind of keep in mind. So all this said, as we talk about cross-play, cross-progression, it's all about the player account. You need a representation of a player such that you can connect a friends list, so that you can invite your friends, so that you can enter a game loop, so you can play together. We're seeing increased scrutiny around data privacy laws. This is really, really crucial. Just in the last 1 to 2 years, the maturity, GDPR came out a while back, but it takes the lawyers a while to decide how hard they go and how they enforce and how those things kind of play out in reality. And I will say that just from personal experience, the level of scrutiny that's being taken to how you manage data and how you manage player data is becoming increasingly important and something to keep in mind. Having talked to a few different lawyers who specialize in the space, one of the questions I ask is, but if I'm a scrappy indie, how do I make this thing and be compliant? And it's just me, and I'm making a game for myself, but I want it to be connected. And honestly, the answer was, I don't know. It's just hard. And so it's tough because I don't love broaching topics and being like, I don't know the answer. But I just want to say that this kind of ties right back into the theme that Mark was sharing, is we need to be talking and working together as a community. And I could absolutely imagine open source standards supporting and promoting best practices and even technologies that we can start sharing, so that smaller game studios have a chance to create something that's online and connected without taking on a ton of legal risk that you accidentally stored somebody's email address or their credit card information incorrectly. The next layer to this is the federated aspect of federated ID, which is the best case experience is you hop on your phone, your PC, your Xbox, your Switch, and you log into one account. And that's really the heart of what it means to have federated identity. I would say the core challenge there is there's a technological challenge of creating this kind of keychain concept where you have your game's account, but then connected to it are all these other platforms. There's a whole level of player experience challenges that I'll briefly touch on. And just in terms of let's pretend I have a friend on PlayStation and on PC. And if we're both logged into PlayStation together, if the user interface shows me my PlayStation friends list independent of my game friends, then that's where I find them. Let's say the next day, though, I'm playing on my PC. Is it the case that my friend's identity, one, is their display name going to change on me because they have a PlayStation display name versus their PC? There's a whole host of questions and problems. And this is why I think it's an interesting space to discuss, because if we stay grounded and players just want to connect with their friends and play together, that's the ultimate goal. And it's really just about understanding the different challenges we kind of have to face to get there. There's a second really crucial layer here in the social graph, and that is you have a different friends list on each of your different platforms. And what that means is, again, you need a central identifier as a game dev to even perform an invite. And so there's a bunch of different challenges in that you're going to have a different friends list depending on which platform you're logged into. Do you try to, as the game developer, as the services developer, create one centralized, representation that's a superset of all of them? Are there platform restrictions? Facebook has very strict rules about how you use their social graph and whether you're allowed to store it. So there's just a ton of questions there that really need to be worked through. So that's it. We want to play anything, anywhere. We understand that we need this shared account. So now I just want to dive briefly into kind of the core targets that we want to achieve, and really just observe some of the considerations there. And again, in preparing for this talk, I wasn't sure. It kind of feels bad to open up a big complex topic and be like, hey, everyone, it's really hard, and then just kind of walk away. And so I apologize that this is more an introduction to the space rather than a solutions walkthrough. But I still hope that it gets the community. I'm really excited. And by the way, I did want to say thank you to Chris and to Drew and to Mark for making this thing happen, because I 100% I'm excited about the prospect that we build a stronger community as services engineers in games, so that we can share, solutions and in the space. So I touched on federated social. It's not enough that you can log in. You still have to actually find your friends. Platform restrictions have been a challenge because every platform has an invested stake in preserving that social network. That social network is value to them, because if you can just download your friends list and take it to a new social media platform, obviously that creates an existential risk for a big company that lives on that. It's been really nice to see the kind of advocacy that Epic Games has been making and saying we need to break down these walls and make this easier. And without going into any kind of opinions about how that approach is done, I just want to observe that it's valuable for us to start breaking down these walls. And it's exciting to see that these platforms have started acknowledging that it's more important that they can be shared participants in the broader, bigger community than trying to be really kind of locked down and exclusive. And I think that that's a really promising trend. Secondarily, there's just the literal mechanics of this. And I do think Rocket League is an excellent example to look at if you're looking for a case study, because they have very strong cross-play experiences. And it's quite a sophisticated UI. It's not just a simple friends list that you right-click and invite. It is multi-layered based on which platform you're logged into. They have different levels of friendship, whether you're just coming in again on the console you're logged into versus, inviting somebody from a PC and a Switch. And I'd say that they've taken this a very long way and have really put calories into it. So that's a great reference point if you're trying to study, like, how are people doing this well. Just an important kind of like observation here. If you want to invite your friends across platform, you have to have federated social. It's not enough to be able to log in on any platform. You actually have to have a record of who's friends with who. And so there's just a slight distinction there in terms of the level of fidelity. So for example, for a smaller studio, there's still value, let's say, in matchmaking across Xbox, PlayStation, and PC, because it gives you a larger pool of players to connect together. So you could achieve that without having that shared friends list. But obviously, I think most games you want to play with your friends. Therefore, taking it that next step is definitely valuable. So cross progression is the idea that when you log into to the same account, obviously that your profile data, your character data, your inventory data, your progress comes with you. It's something that sounds, I guess I carry with me an expectation that most games have this locked down, but I do want to observe that it's still a challenge even for recent games. And so there's been a couple examples. For example, Minecraft Dungeons, which has been wonderful. My kids have been loving it and playing it. But the inability to kind of log into your other platform and just carry your account with you is still this point of friction that makes it an extra layer of complexity for the players. And if we think about play anything, play anywhere, it all comes back to this trend towards platform independence and shared community, such that we don't want to force players to have to reconcile these things and think through these things and challenge these things. And so cross progression is the first step on that journey. Once you have that shared account that everyone can kind of connect to, you're in really good shape. Just kind of here's like just a couple little pro tip observations. You really need to make sure that you don't save player data according to a single platform's identifier. If you store somebody's data based on their Steam ID or their Xbox ID, you're already putting yourself in a really difficult spot. So it's worth early on, even if you don't have the time to implement full crossplay, make sure you generate a unique account ID for your game and connect that to whichever platforms you support. Even if you don't go to the full extent of this goal, just creating that one level of separation is going to set you up to build later. Yeah, so crossplay is, I think, the fun one. This is the awesome experience that you get when you get matched across platforms, and that's just easy. It was really exciting to see announcements around some of the early crossplay titles. Like, it was fun reading, forum stories of like, oh, like 8 years ago, I chose Xbox, my friend chose PlayStation, and I haven't played a video game with them since. But now, there's like a Fortnite experience or a few of these other titles. And it was really exciting to see, because it's odd to think about an artificial barrier that's created based on platform choice. And this really gets to, I think, the ultimate goal that we strive for. There are other considerations on a technical side. For example, like watching out for matching PC players with consoles. Like, depending on the type of game, that actually may be inappropriate. So it's not enough to just create one big pool and throw everyone in there. You're actually going to have to be conscientious and say, oh, this is a tactical first-person shooter. It may not make sense then to have somebody with a mouse and keyboard fight against somebody with a controller. Or there's a whole second layer of maybe you have different input control schemes, and maybe you have some auto-targeting support on a controller. There's questions about UI restrictions. Again, some of this does come to the artificial restrictions that are put in place by platforms. So you'll notice, again, to use Rocket League as an example, they have a separate icon if somebody's on a different platform. And that's because, for example, competitors don't want to see the icon of their competition in-game, in presentation, while somebody's online. So there's different levels of, again, the old days of a username, a password, and a username, like a display name, doesn't exist anymore. You now have to keep a list of display names based on which accounts you're connected. You have to keep a hierarchical list of which account icon can I show. It can't just be an Xbox Live icon. It has to be either that or just a generic game icon, so that you protect against this. You have to answer questions about where you're saving, avatar data, and like if you have a gamer tag or a gamer ID or a gamer logo, it's like, do you pull those down from each platform independently? Do you allow the player to provide their own custom in your game? And then, just again to observe on the technical side, matchmakers are a big part of this equation, and you tend to have different considerations that are outside the sphere, like geo-targeting. And so being aware that you have multiple conflicting goals in mind, which is anyone can play anywhere with anyone, but if you're adjusting for cross-platform considerations, you also have to keep in mind that you might be geo-targeting, so that players are playing, with the same level of pain. And so it just gets interlayered, and it needs to be considered. Yeah, I guess almost all of my bullet points really are just about platform restrictions and how you have to be careful. So, again, I do apologize that this wasn't a more like solutions-filled kind of walkthrough, but I think the biggest observation I make is that in today's online service games, even compared to what we had a decade ago, the need for you connecting across platforms, across players, is really foundational. And any of the rich social features that we want to explore really need to sit on top of that. And so it's an interesting consideration. I think there's absolutely an opportunity for us to find shared solutions in this space, because I think opening up online service-based games to the indie community, for example, is something that I really want to see, because right now, oftentimes you have to build a very large team to support all of this kind of custom development. And then you have, like Mark points out, these custom solutions across every studio and every shop, and it can get entrenched about which solution is the right one, but also just expensive to make. So I hope that this at least broaches a topic and introduces an idea that folks can start communicating about and sharing about. And I think at the meta layer, I'm really interested in what we can do as a group, and see what Chris and Drew have been championing here, and what Mark champions in terms of developer community, of like, where do we have these conversations? What are the next steps? So that's I'm definitely eager to see. So thank you, everyone, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, so I was going to start doing a little breakout thing, unless you've got another slide you want to show before that, or any other kind of carry.
Yeah, let me just
stuff.
quickly.
Sure.
I just want to quickly riff on what he said. I think it's a really interesting topic to talk about. Like, how do you handle? There's this sort of growth from like, I have a game and somebody can join it at all, to like, I have a game and it works on this platform, or it works on these platforms, or it grows. And for me, I have this conversation with clients like probably once a week, at least once a month, of like, okay, I'm building a multiplayer game. Like, what do I need to do, and at what scale? And I have to lay out this plan for them of like, you are the 100 user indie game and you do this, and you are the 1,000 user indie game and the 10,000 user indie game, the 100,000 user AAA game now. And one of the problems that I see and I hear about is only the first layer of that is really covered. It's like, I am an indie game, and I'm like, okay, go look at PlayFab and go look at these guys for the first couple layers of that. And then after that, it's kind of a free-for-all. And the answer is sort of like, you build your own thing and you work on your own crossplay, and you get into some really complex problems. And honestly, you go and hire people to solve those problems for you, rather than you pull maybe there's one or two open source solutions or one or two off-the-shelf solutions, but there's not like somebody bringing that all together right now. So I look forward to more of that in the future. Yeah, so we're going to jump into breakouts pretty quickly here. Again, if the room goes quiet, your topic is, what challenges have you faced handling crossplay or managing user accounts for your game, or what questions do you have if you haven't gotten to that point yet? So I'll let Chris break us out again, though, from here.
I also want to encourage folks to I've been going to networking events like this for the past 2 decades, and very much want to encourage thinking of this as a networking event, in so much as if you're sitting at a table at a networking event and you're like, well, this just isn't the conversation I want to be having, or like, I already know some of these people, I want to mix the dice up or whatever. Feel free, leave the breakout room, come back to main, be like, Chris, can you send me to another table? I'll just shoot you off to another. No one take that personally if someone leaves your chat. It's not because they hate you or say anything wrong. They're just trying to roll the dice, and vice versa. Don't feel awkward about doing that. Literally just leave breakout room. We're all here to shuffle. It helps everybody else to cross-pollinate. Nothing wrong with that. And the assignments are random, which also means that like the overlap is weirder than we expect, because everyone's brains are really bad at probability. So we'll be like, is this the same breakout room? It shouldn't be. But just to say, that's how random odds work in a set of 17. So yeah, I'll start doing our breakout room stuff. Again, 15 minutes. All my business stuff exists fully online. I've been running Zoom meetings like semi-professionally for like 5 years. And so I'm very comfortable in this space. And one of the things I like most about it is the extent to which there's just this opportunity for people elsewhere in the world to directly access LA networks, LA expertise, no matter where they're living. Heck, even part of why we started doing that was we had people in we tried to be an LA local group. We had people who were 3 hours away because LA is enormous and a lot of traffic. And we're like, hey, it works better for people in LA too, because going outside is terrible here.
I've been thinking a lot about this because there's so many tech companies, right? They go from scrappy startup of just somebody, in their bedroom, and then they're like the largest company in the world with the world's largest social graph, And it's like, oh, it turns out that all the corners that were cut when it didn't matter because this was a hobby kid project has suddenly become this multi.
Is it mitosis or meiosis where the cells merge back together?
Mitosis.
Mitosis.
No, mitosis is when they
Isn't
separate.
that when they...
Yeah, meiosis, I think, is when it's the opposite of the splitting.
My favorite part is using words to communicate something where I'm so unsure what it means, as if it's going to communicate new value, and I use it when the whole point is nobody remembers 11th grade biology class or whatever.
My favorite experiment is that when you speak in ways that are totally impossible to interpret because of how vague they are, it sounds the same as normal.
Yeah, that's true. I also like the possibility for inspiring people through confusion. Some of my best work came from misunderstanding what a game was based on a video, thinking I was making a clone, found that I was like innovating because that wasn't what they did at all. And there's a lot of opportunity to misunderstand speakers or writing and just run with it and then find out like, oh, that's not what that classic writer meant, or that's not at all what that film was about, etc. But yeah, so welcome back to Main Room. Now that we're about 15
mistakes.
I don't know if basically this is the point where, Drew, if you have any like closing slides you want to do of, hey everybody, we're not getting kicked out, but Butcher's dog or wherever we are is closing down. But also we're not actually kicking anybody out, so people can keep hanging out. We may not do more breakout rooms. We're now at about 15, which is enough. And one of these is a fake recording account. 2 of these are hosts. We could just all chill in one big chat until people kind of peter out. I know people got other stuff to do, but also like this is a chance to network and chat and to talk to people who weren't in your other breakout room. But Drew, any closing slides, things to say, thanking our speakers, etc.?
Yeah, I want to bring up the slides just so you have our gosh, do I have this up twice?
How to follow us on socials and things.
Same one. Yeah, follow us on the Twitters and stuff. But first, I did want to say, like, thank you all for coming out. I want to make this a real community that has, real long-lasting events and relationships and get us talking longer term. To that end, I may try to find a way to drop a survey in one of your inboxes through one of the channels, if we can do that through Eventbrite or something else. And if you could fill that out, that would be awesome. I think there's a lot of opportunity to either turn this into a series of events or, have a group that's focused on providing events to different kinds of events to this demographic, I guess, of developers. So thank you all for coming out. If you want to get on our socials or hear anything else coming from IGDA, from the Los Angeles chapter, and hopefully more stuff like this, you can find it here. I will be around for the next 20 minutes to hang out and chat with people. And to kick it off, I wanted to mention this story related to what Chris was just talking about, of if you heard the story of how StarCraft 2 or StarCraft 1 happened, where Blizzard went to some conference. They saw somebody else making an RTS that looked amazing, and they were like, oh no, we can't just make StarCraft as a clone on the Warcraft 2 engine with sci-fi. They're like, we got to up our game. And so they rebuilt the whole thing from scratch in a couple of months or whatever. And it turns out the game studio that showed off that other thing, first off, it was all previs, none of it was real gameplay. And second off, they went under 3 months later.
Another piece of that, by the way, is that I don't necessarily detect a great deal of massive change from the end of from Warcraft to StarCraft in that step either. Still more or less in that
graphical.
bubble.
It was mostly
and even graphical. I'm also reminded of these classic things like the old 4-minute mile thing where somebody runs it, so then suddenly other people realize they can do it. But in game space all the time, and Tomo knows exactly what I'm talking about. We won't get more into details. There was a team that many years ago may or may not have an E3 demo of a machine gun firing into water showing rippling effects from the water getting hit by bullets. And it turned out that they couldn't get that performance. The video was sped up 3x. They were like, we could optimize it later. They never could optimize it for current consoles, cut the feature entirely. But showed it at E3, and then people were like, oh, it must be doable on current machines. And other people figure out how to do rippling water on current machines. And there's some world-class MMA and stunt actor people who watched special effects as a kid, not knowing that was wire work, green screens, cheating up the wazoo, and found ways to physically run in loops and do completely impossible things from just the idea of someone can do that apparently. And I think all the time we actually have indies doing this who see games get made, don't realize there's actually 15 people that aren't credited behind that thing. And they're like, well, 2 people did it, so how do we do this? And usually it doesn't work out well and everyone goes under, but sometimes it works. So anyway, that's our inspiration now.
I think it's true though, right? Certain clever solutions would never have happened if you knew how hard it was to find those solutions.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of lying to ourselves about what's feasible that leads us down the finding out one step at a time of yeah.
And over the long haul, or at least over the course of many samples, luck can be a strategy.
Yeah, as long as you make some sort of strategy that includes being able to roll the dice more than once. I'll say this: if we want to do a real quickish go around, and I always emphasize quickish just because otherwise this could easily fill an hour if people actually did their full intros. Just for people who didn't necessarily have crossover in the chats, it's a great way to figure out oh, you know what, I should connect with that person after. I should follow them on Twitter because they're doing kind of the same thing I'm doing. We can't actually go around it like we would for a table since everyone's seated differently on each other's screens. But if I can do a quick call out, if you just want I don't know, 2 sentence version of what you do. I'm a streamer, I'm an engineer, what have you, etc. That's handy for anybody who missed each other in the other breakouts. Odie, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Odie. I'm a software engineer at Riot, currently working on Central Player Dynamics. I used to work with Drew back when he was also at Riot, working on player behavior.
Right on. Alana.
Hi, I'm Alana. I'm the founder of Team Toad House. It's an indie game studio that focuses on games with the theme of self-care. I'm working on a game called Call Me Sarah about starting over in a new town and making friends as an adult and all the anxiety that comes with it. And I'm also a self-care consultant for the gaming industry. Nice to meet all of you.
Speaking of anxiety and self-care, I should have made this note earlier, but if anyone is Mike shy and would prefer to just type their answer, I will read it. That is totally fine, too. Over to Andre.
Hi, I'm Andre. I currently work at Blizzard Entertainment on the WoW website as a software engineer, and along with Odie, I'm also part of the Drew Gang. So,
right on. Ian.
Hello, I'm Ian. I'm a software engineer over at Riot Games. I actually work with Odie, have worked with Odie for years as well. I'm also part of the Drew Gang. I work on Central Player Dynamics as well, so same introduction as Odie.
Cool. T. Minchelli of Game Breaking Studios.
Yep. I am Tadeo. I am in the new generation of Drew people. So I'm a engineering intern at Game Breaking Studios. I've said this before, but I'm still a student, as the intern label suggests. So I'm mostly here to learn from all you guys.
Cool beans. Yoshitomo.
Hey, Tomo Moriwaki here, game designer for 24 years, co-founded small studio, Steam early access game about storytelling and fantasy.
And name of that studio is?
Hyperkinetic Studios.
Right on. Blizzard Entertainment's Kay Viglucci. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it.
Hey, no worries. You nailed it. Hey, my name is Kevin Viglucci, software engineer at Blizzard Entertainment. I'm on the same team with Andre. I also know Drew through Andre. I work on the World of Warcraft website, do a lot of API development, front-end tech, back-end tech, all that.
Rad. Obviously, basically our hosts, including myself and our speakers, I'll skip because obviously introduce themselves. On to Greg Lieberman.
Cool. So I'm a senior software engineer in the games industry, been here for a decade, including companies like Konami and Zynga. Most recently, I have founded a company called Magma Code LLC to make my indie game, Grammar Ninja. So check it out. It will be launching this week.
Love it. And is it Johan or Johan?
It's Johan. Hey, I'm Johan De Bruyn. I worked at Riot for 6 years, and 1 year ago, I decided to start my own indie company named Erudis Games, where I do a grammar game named Grammar's Wars.
Right on.
Let's chat about this.
And then David.
Hey, everyone. I'm David. I'm a server programmer at Activision. I guess I'm old school Drew Gang from pre-Maestros. Anything dedicated servers, cloud infrastructure, deployment, I'm your guy.
Cool. And I'll emphasize, too, in addition to Twitter names and renaming yourself on Zoom or Handy, I believe people want to blast out to the chat also your Twitter links, Twitter, heck, self-promote your company website, etc. over there. It's just nice. It's easier for someone to click on, save for later, copy-paste. Easier, makes it easier for them to have to retype and miss a letter and that kind of thing. Also makes it clear, every now and then, we figured out from some meetups last night, some people put their IG handle instead of their Twitter handle, and it leads to some mix-ups, so it's easier that way to throw a link down there. I think if you put an HTTPS before it, it'll turn into a link. I think otherwise, Zoom's not smart if no GG is a valid top-level domain. But other than that, I'll take off my moderator hat, and if people just want to chat, say stuff, hang out, linger. If anybody feels like, hey, this is too many people for one room, we can break out room again, but I feel like otherwise, at this point, Team's functional.
Also, if you want to go, then you can feel free to go.
Also true.
Yeah,
you
I really want to go.
If you're hungry or... Yeah.
It's not that I want to go, but it was nice seeing all of you.
Self-care, best care. Bye, Lana.
Yes. Bye.
David, long time to see.
Yeah, man. Hey, how's it going?
Life is good. I'm glad we could get some of the old school Drew gang back together.
Yeah.
I didn't know I had a gang, guys.
Yeah.
Apparently you do.
You made it happen, Drew.
Nice. Yeah. Well, part of how these things happen, right, is we start, I mix in some people from my gang, Drew mixes people with his gangs, other people show up and there's just people here. They become a part of the meta gang. And actually, on that note, I'll just literally kill the recording now because we've got enough stuff in terms of after materials. So like, let's wave as if it's ending, and then people will literally see this on YouTube and be like, "Oh, that was the end of it. I missed out the live conversation. It was so cool. I should have been there because it was free and completely online." And Chris like tweeted it, and IGDA tweeted it, and people should have had their chance. Bye, y'all. Closing recording, but we'll keep chatting.